She sat in silence for 3 hours. No words. No conversation. Just a quiet woman in seat 21C that everyone ignored. Then both pilots collapsed. The plane had no one to fly it. That's when a Navy SEAL shouted desperately, "Who can fly this bird?" She finally spoke. Before you watch full story, comment below from which country are you watching. Don't forget to subscribe. The Boeing 737 climbed through thick clouds over the Atlantic Ocean as passengers settled into their seats for the long flight from New York to London. In seat 21C, a woman in her early 30s sat quietly by the window, her dark hair pulled back in a simple ponytail. She wore plain jeans and a gray jacket that made her blend into the crowd of travelers. Her name was Maya Torres, but nobody on this flight knew that. Nobody knew anything about her because she hadn't spoken a single word since boarding. When the flight attendant came by with drinks, Maya simply pointed at the water bottle and gave a small nod of thanks. Her lips stayed pressed together. The flight attendant smiled politely and moved on, assuming this passenger just didn't feel like talking. Some people were like that on planes. Maybe she was tired. Maybe she had a lot on her mind. The flight attendant didn't think much of it. The man in seat 21B, a businessman with a laptop, had tried to make conversation when they first sat down. "Long flight ahead, huh?" he said with a friendly smile. Maya looked at him briefly, gave the smallest nod, then turned her gaze back to the window. The businessman waited for words that never came. He tried once more. "Heading to London for work or vacation?" Again, just a slight shake of her head and silence. He got the message. This woman clearly wanted to be left alone. The teenage girl in seat 21A had her headphones on, lost in her music. She glanced at Maya once or twice, noticing how still and quiet the woman sat. Something about Maya seemed sad, the girl thought. Maybe she lost someone recently. Maybe she was going through a breakup. The girl had seen people like this before, people who shut down and built walls around themselves. She decided not to bother the quiet woman and went back to her playlist. 2 hours into the flight, another flight attendant came through the cabin checking on passengers. She noticed Maya sitting perfectly still, staring out at the endless ocean below. The attendant leaned down slightly. "Ma'am, would you like anything? A snack? Another drink?" Maya turned her head, made brief eye contact, and shook her head no with a polite but distant expression. The flight attendant felt a small pang of concern. This passenger seemed so withdrawn, so trapped in her own world. But there were 150 other people on this plane who needed attention too, so she moved along. What nobody on that plane knew, what nobody could possibly guess from looking at the silent woman in seat 21C, was that Maya Torres had spent the last 8 years flying some of the most dangerous missions the United States military had ever conducted. She was a night stalker, part of the legendary 160th Special Operations Aviation Regiment. She had piloted MH-60 Black Hawks deep into enemy territory, carried Navy SEALs into combat zones where one mistake meant death, and flown rescue missions that saved dozens of lives under conditions that would terrify most pilots. Maya had landed helicopters on mountainsides in complete darkness with enemy fire lighting up the sky around her. She had navigated through sandstorms in the Middle East where visibility dropped to zero and only her instruments and instincts kept her aircraft from crashing. She had coordinated with SEAL teams during raids where timing had to be perfect down to the second, where lives depended on her ability to hold her aircraft steady while operators fast-roped into hostile compounds. But none of that showed on her face now. She looked like any other tired traveler, someone who just wanted to get from point A to point B without interaction. She had learned to hide her military background well. After so many years of keeping secrets, of not being able to talk about where she went or what she did, silence had become her default setting. Even now, on leave and traveling home to visit family in England, she found it easier to say nothing than to engage in small talk that might lead to questions she couldn't answer. 3 hours into the flight, the cabin had settled into that familiar airplane quiet. Some passengers slept, some watched movies on their seat screens, some read books. The businessman next to Maya typed away on his laptop. The teenage girl had fallen asleep with her head against the window. Maya sat awake, her eyes occasionally scanning the cabin out of habit, always aware of her surroundings even when there was no threat. She noticed things other passengers didn't. The slight turbulence that made the wings flex was normal. The change in engine tone as the pilots adjusted thrust was routine. The way the flight attendants walked with practiced balance through the aisle meant they were experienced crew. Everything seemed perfectly normal on Flight 2847. Then came the sound that made Maya's entire body tense. A ding from the cockpit, followed by another, then rapid movement as both senior flight attendants rushed toward the front of the plane. Other passengers barely noticed, but Maya's trained instincts kicked in immediately. Something was wrong up front. The way the attendants moved, the concerned looks on their faces, the speed of their steps, all of it screamed emergency to someone who had spent years reading tactical situations. Maya watched as one flight attendant disappeared into the cockpit, then emerged seconds later with fear written across her face. The attendant grabbed the intercom handset, and her voice came through the speakers trying to sound calm but failing. "Ladies and gentlemen, if there is a doctor on board, please identify yourself to the flight crew immediately." The cabin stirred. Passengers looked around. A middle-aged man stood up and made his way forward. 5 minutes passed, feeling like an eternity. The doctor emerged from the cockpit shaking his head, speaking quietly but urgently to the flight attendants. Maya couldn't hear the words, but she could read the body language. Bad news. Very bad news. The flight attendants gathered together, whispering frantically. One of them looked like she might cry. Another kept glancing back at the passengers with barely concealed panic. Then Maya heard it. A voice from further up in first class, strong and commanding. "What's the situation?" A man stood up, tall and broad-shouldered with short hair and a bearing that screamed military even in civilian clothes. He strode toward the flight attendants with authority. Maya recognized the walk, the posture, the tone. This man was Special Operations, probably a SEAL based on his age and the way he carried himself. The lead flight attendant spoke quietly to him, but in the nervous silence of the cabin, Maya's trained ears picked up fragments. Both pilots, food poisoning, captain unconscious, first officer barely functional, automated systems. No one who can. The SEAL's face went hard. He turned and scanned the cabin, his eyes moving over every passenger with tactical assessment. Then he did something that broke every protocol. He raised his voice loud enough for the entire plane to hear. "Listen up. We have an emergency situation. Both pilots are incapacitated. The plane is currently on autopilot, but that won't last forever. We need someone who can fly this aircraft." Panic rippled through the cabin. People gasped. Someone screamed. The teenage girl next to Maya woke up confused and frightened. The SEAL continued, his voice cutting through the rising fear. "I need to know right now if anyone on this plane has flight experience. Any pilots, any aviation background, anything." Silence. Terrified silence. Passengers looked at each other desperately, hoping someone would stand up. Nobody did. The businessman next to Maya gripped his armrest, his face gone pale. The teenager started crying quietly. The SEAL's jaw clenched. Maya could see him running calculations trying to figure out options that didn't exist. He pulled out his phone, probably hoping for a signal to reach air traffic control, but they were over the middle of the Atlantic Ocean. No towers, no signal, nothing. They were alone up here with 2 unconscious pilots and a plane full of terrified people. Then the SEAL did something that changed everything. He switched to military terminology, the language of operators who lived and breathed tactical situations. His voice boomed through the cabin with desperate urgency. "Who can fly this bird? I need a pilot now. Anyone with stick time, anyone who's operated aircraft under pressure. I don't care if it's civilian or military, we need you right now." The words "fly this bird" hit Maya like an electric shock. That wasn't civilian language. That was operator talk, military slang, the exact terminology used in special operations when seconds mattered and everyone needed to understand immediately. Her heart rate kicked up. Her hands, which had been resting calmly in her lap for 3 hours, now gripped the armrests. Every instinct in her body screamed that she couldn't stay silent anymore. But another part of her hesitated. She was off duty. She was trying to leave that life behind, even if just for a few weeks. She had spent so long being quiet, being invisible, keeping her skills hidden. The thought of revealing herself, of stepping into that spotlight, made her stomach tight. What if she made things worse? What if her helicopter experience didn't translate to a commercial jet? The SEAL was moving through the cabin now, looking desperately at faces, hoping to see recognition in someone's eyes. "Come on. We've got maybe 20 minutes before we need to start descent procedures, and nobody in that cockpit can do it. This plane will run out of fuel eventually. We need help now." His voice cracked slightly on the last word, and Maya heard something she recognized, something she had felt herself in combat, the sound of a leader who was running out of options and watching people he was responsible for slip toward disaster. The teenager next to Maya was sobbing now. "We're going to die. Oh God, we're all going to die." The businessman was praying quietly, his eyes shut tight. Throughout the cabin, people were crying, holding each other, making phone calls to loved ones even though there was no signal, desperate to hear a voice one last time. Maya closed her eyes and took one deep breath. She thought about her team, the SEALs she had flown with, the operators who had trusted her to get them into and out of hell. She thought about the oath she had taken to support and defend, to never leave anyone behind. She thought about the little girl crying next to her, terrified and helpless. She thought about all the times she had told herself that her skills existed for moments exactly like this. Her eyes opened. Her jaw set. Her hands released the armrests. And for the first time since boarding this flight, Maya Torres spoke. Her voice was quiet at first but steady. "Captain." The SEAL was 2 rows ahead, still searching faces. He didn't hear her. She tried again louder. "Captain. Over here." The SEAL spun around, his eyes locking onto her. Maya unbuckled her seatbelt and stood up. Every passenger nearby turned to look at her, shocked to hear the silent woman from 21C finally speaking. The businessman's mouth fell open. The teenager stopped crying, staring at Maya in confusion. Maya walked toward the SEAL, her movements suddenly different. The withdrawn, quiet passenger was gone. In her place stood someone who moved with purpose, with confidence, with the bearing of someone who had operated in situations far worse than this. The SEAL recognized it immediately. His eyes narrowed, assessing her with new understanding. "I can help," Maya said, her voice stronger now, years of giving clear briefings under pressure coming back. "I'm a military aviator, Special Operations, 160th SOAR. 8 years flying Black Hawks for your teams and others. I've got thousands of hours in high-stress environments. I'm current on my ratings and I understand aircraft systems." The SEAL's face transformed from desperation to intense focus. "Night Stalker." Maya nodded. "Designation?" It was a test, making sure she was who she claimed to be. "Chief Warrant Officer 3 Maya Torres. I've flown support for DevGru, Green Team rotations, hostage rescue scenarios, and combat insertions across 3 theaters." The SEAL's shoulders relaxed slightly. Those details weren't public knowledge. This woman was real. "Can you fly a 737? He asked bluntly. Maya's response was honest. "Not certified on this aircraft specifically, but I understand aviation systems, flight controls, navigation, and emergency procedures. I've cross-trained on fixed wing for transport coordination. I can read instrumentation, manage flight controls, and communicate with ATC. With the first officer conscious, even barely, I can help execute what needs to happen." The SEAL made his decision in 2 seconds. "Good enough. I'm Captain Jake Morrison, SEAL Team 3. Right now you're the most qualified person on this plane. What do you need?" Maya's mind was already working through the problem. "Get me into that cockpit. I need to assess the first officer's condition and see what state the aircraft is in. We'll need someone to help coordinate with ATC once we get back in radio range. And everyone in this cabin needs to stay calm." Morrison nodded and turned to address the passengers, his voice commanding immediate attention. "Everyone listen. We have a qualified military pilot who's going to help manage this situation. I need absolute quiet and cooperation. Stay in your seats, follow all instructions from the crew and stay calm. We're going to get through this." Some passengers looked relieved. Others looked skeptical, staring at Maya like she couldn't possibly be what she claimed. The businessman who had sat next to Maya for 3 hours looked utterly shocked. "You're a pilot? You never said a word. I thought you were just..." He trailed off, not sure how to finish. Maya glanced at him briefly. "Didn't need to," she said simply, then moved toward the cockpit with Morrison right behind her. The flight attendants looked at Maya with a mixture of hope and uncertainty. "Are you really a pilot?" one asked desperately. Maya nodded. "Military aviation, special operations helicopters, but I understand fixed-wing systems. Let me see what we're dealing with." The attendant opened the cockpit door. The sight inside was bad. The captain was unconscious, slumped in his seat with his face pale and sweating. The first officer was awake but barely, his skin gray-green, clearly fighting nausea and disorientation. The autopilot was engaged, showing their position over the Atlantic Ocean, still hours from any landing site. Multiple warning lights flickered on the panel. Maya stepped inside, her eyes immediately scanning the instrumentation. It was different from her Black Hawk, but the fundamentals were the same. Airspeed, altitude, heading, fuel status, system indicators. She could read it. She understood it. Morrison helped move the unconscious captain out of his seat, laying him in the small area behind the cockpit. Maya slid into the left seat, her hands naturally finding the controls even though this wasn't her aircraft. She looked at the first officer. "Can you talk? Can you tell me what's happening?" The man nodded weakly. "Food poisoning. Both ate same meal, hit fast. He swallowed hard, fighting his body's rebellion. Autopilot engaged, course set for London, but fuel situation, weather ahead. He couldn't finish, leaning to the side to vomit into a bag. Maya's mind raced through the problem. They were on autopilot, which was good, but autopilot couldn't land the plane safely without human guidance. The first officer was in no condition to perform complex operations. They needed to calculate fuel, weather, possible diversion airports, communication with air traffic control once back in range, and eventually somehow land this aircraft. Morrison stood behind her, looking at the instrument panel. What can I do? Maya appreciated his direct approach. Can you read instruments and follow instructions? Morrison nodded. Navy trained me on basic aviation coordination. I understand navigation and communication. Maya felt a small spark of hope. Good. Sit in the right seat. You're going to be my eyes on specific indicators while I manage flight controls. Morrison took the first officer's seat after they moved the sick man to the back. Maya's hands touched the yoke gently, not taking control yet but familiarizing herself with the feel. Okay, she said, more to herself than to Morrison. We're at 35,000 feet, speed 480 knots, heading 075 degrees toward London. Fuel shows 6 hours remaining at current consumption. Weather ahead looks rough based on these indicators. She reached for the radio controls. We need to contact someone. We're out of range for normal ATC, but there might be emergency frequencies. She adjusted settings, trying different channels, broadcasting in the clear. Any station, any aircraft, this is Flight 2847, we have an emergency situation, both pilots incapacitated, requesting immediate assistance, over. Static. She tried again. More static. They were in that dead zone over the Atlantic where communication was limited to satellite systems, and Maya wasn't sure she could access those from this panel without more time to figure it out. We might be on our own for a while, she told Morrison. The next hour was intense. Maya studied every system, asked Morrison to help identify specific controls, and gradually built a mental picture of how this aircraft operated. The first officer drifted in and out of consciousness but managed to give crucial information when awake. Fuel pumps, switches overhead, landing gear controls, flap settings. Each piece of information was gold. Meanwhile, Morrison had taken on the task of keeping everyone in the cabin calm. He went back several times to give updates, his command presence and confident manner helping to reduce panic. Our pilot is assessing the situation. She knows what she's doing. Everyone stay calm and follow instructions. The passengers clung to his words like lifelines. The teenage girl from 21A, no longer crying, asked Morrison quietly, "Is she really going to save us?" Morrison looked at the girl and spoke with absolute certainty. "That woman has flown missions you'll never hear about, in conditions that would ground any commercial pilot, with people's lives depending on split-second decisions. If anyone can get us down safely, it's her." Back in the cockpit, Maya was working through the biggest problem, landing. She had never landed a 737. She had watched it done, understood the principles, knew the theory, but theory and execution were different things. This aircraft was heavier, faster, and less responsive than her Black Hawk. The margin for error was smaller. One mistake on approach and they wouldn't get a second chance. She spoke to herself, working through procedures. Approach speed for this aircraft, probably 140 knots. Flaps deployed in stages. Gear down at specific altitude. Glide slope maintenance. Runway alignment. Threshold crossing height. Her Night Stalker training kicked in, the same methodical preparation she used before dangerous missions. Break it down. Step by step. Trust your training. Morrison watched her work with growing respect. You've done this before. Not this aircraft, but this pressure. Maya nodded. Different bird, same principles. In combat, you don't get perfect conditions. You land where you have to, when you have to, with whatever information you have. This is just another mission. 3 hours into Maya's time in the cockpit, the radio crackled to life. Flight 2847, this is Shannon Control, we're receiving your emergency transmission, please respond. Maya grabbed the microphone, relief flooding through her. Shannon Control, Flight 2847, we have dual pilot incapacitation due to food poisoning, aircraft currently under control by military aviator passenger, requesting emergency landing assistance, over. There was a pause, then a different voice, older and more authoritative. Flight 2847, this is Senior Controller Davis. Confirm you have a qualified pilot aboard? Maya keyed the mic, Controller Davis, negative on commercial qualification. I am a military special operations helicopter pilot with 8 years tactical aviation experience. I am not rated on this aircraft but am maintaining control with assistance from semi-conscious first officer. We need talk-down assistance for landing, over. Another pause, longer this time. Maya could imagine the chaos her transmission just caused in that control room. Then Davis came back, his voice steady. Flight 2847, understood. We are coordinating with Boeing technical support and gathering our most experienced controllers. We will guide you through this. What is your fuel status and current position? For the next hour, Maya worked with Shannon Control to plan their approach. They decided on Shannon Airport in Ireland as the landing site, shorter than continuing to London and with better weather. Controllers talked her through system operations she wasn't familiar with, walked through descent procedures, and arranged for every emergency resource available to be standing by. Maya's military training proved invaluable. She was used to taking instructions from ground coordinators, used to processing information quickly under stress, used to executing complex maneuvers while maintaining communication. The controllers recognized they were talking to someone with exceptional aviation skills, even if not in this specific aircraft. Morrison remained in the right seat, calling out readings as instructed. Fuel flow normal. Hydraulic pressure good. Altitude 34,000. Airspeed 465. He had become an effective co-pilot despite no formal training, his military discipline and ability to follow precise instructions making him invaluable. As they approached Irish airspace, reality set in. The first officer had passed out completely. The captain was still unconscious. Maya was going to have to land this plane herself with only radio guidance and Morrison's assistance. 150 people were depending on her ability to do something she had never actually done before. She thought about her instructors at Fort Campbell, the grizzled veterans who had trained her to fly Night Stalker missions. They had taught her that every landing was just a controlled crash, that flying was about managing energy and making continuous small corrections, that confidence came from preparation and preparation came from knowledge. She had the knowledge. She had spent the last 4 hours preparing. Now she needed the confidence. Shannon Control came through again. Flight 2847, we have you on radar. Begin descent to 10,000 feet, reduce speed to 250 knots. We're going to take this very slowly, very carefully. You're going to do fine. Maya appreciated the controller's calm voice. Copy Shannon, beginning descent. She disengaged the autopilot for the first time and took manual control. The aircraft responded smoothly to her inputs. She had expected it to feel heavy and sluggish compared to her helicopter, but the 737 had its own grace. She began the descent, monitoring multiple instruments, making small adjustments, feeling the aircraft's behavior. Morrison called out readings continuously. 10,500 feet, airspeed 260, descent rate 1,500 feet per minute. As they descended through the clouds, turbulence hit. The aircraft bounced and shuddered. Maya's hands remained steady on the controls, her special operations training cutting through the fear that might paralyze a civilian. She had flown through worse, through enemy fire and sandstorms, through conditions where instruments failed and visibility was zero. This was rough, but it wasn't impossible. Flight 2847, you're handling the turbulence well. Continue descent to 5,000 feet. The controller's voice was proud now, encouraging. Maya had gained their confidence. They believed she could do this. She needed to believe it too. At 5,000 feet, they broke through the clouds and Maya saw Ireland below, the green landscape and the airport in the distance. Shannon Control began vectoring her toward the runway. Flight 2847, turn left heading 090, maintain 3,000 feet, you're 15 miles from runway threshold. Maya executed the turn smoothly. Morrison continued his callouts. Heading 090, altitude 3,000, speed 220. Maya could see the runway now, a long strip of concrete that looked impossibly narrow from this distance. The controller's voice guided her through each step. Flight 2847, reduce speed to 180 knots, begin configuring for landing. Flaps to position 5. Maya reached for the flap lever, found it where the first officer had indicated hours ago, and deployed the flaps. The aircraft's nose pitched down slightly, and she compensated with gentle back pressure on the yoke. Gear down. Maya found the landing gear lever and pulled it. 3 green lights illuminated, confirming the gear was down and locked. The aircraft slowed further. Flaps to 15. She moved the lever again. The runway was getting closer, but she was still high, still fast. Flaps to 30, reduce speed to 145 knots. This was it. Final approach. Everything she had done for the past 4 hours came down to the next 3 minutes. Shannon Control's voice was calm and reassuring. Flight 2847, you're lined up perfectly. Maintain 140 knots, descent rate 700 feet per minute. You're doing great. Just keep it smooth and steady. Maya's world narrowed to the runway ahead, the instruments in front of her, and the controller's voice in her headset. Her hands made tiny adjustments to the controls, keeping the aircraft aligned, maintaining speed, managing descent. She could see emergency vehicles lining the runway, fire trucks and ambulances, but she blocked them out. Focus on the task. Nothing else matters. 500 feet looking good. The runway was rushing up now. Maya could see individual markings on the pavement. 400 feet, maintain current approach. Morrison had stopped calling readings, letting her concentrate. 300 feet, you're in the slot. The runway threshold passed beneath them. Maya began to reduce throttle, raising the nose slightly to flare for landing. 100 feet. She could feel the aircraft wanting to settle, gravity pulling them down. 50 feet, looking perfect. She pulled back further on the yoke, bleeding off speed, keeping the descent rate manageable. 30 feet, 20 feet. The main gear touched concrete with a chirp of tires. Maya kept the nose up for a moment longer, then let it settle. The nose gear contacted the runway. She was down. They were down. Flight 2847, welcome to Shannon. The controller's voice was thick with emotion. That was one of the finest landings I've ever seen. Maya deployed the thrust reversers and applied brakes, the aircraft slowing smoothly. Fire trucks paced them on either side, ready for disaster that never came. The 737 rolled to a slow taxi speed and Maya guided it clear of the runway, finally bringing it to a complete stop on a taxiway. She set the parking brake and shut down the engines. For a long moment, she just sat there, her hands still on the controls, her body flooded with adrenaline draining away. Morrison looked at her with undisguised awe. Chief, that was... He couldn't find words. Maya turned to him with a slight smile. That was a landing. Not my smoothest, but we're down and everyone's safe. That's what matters. Behind them, the cabin erupted in cheers and crying and applause. Passengers who had spent hours terrified, certain they would die, suddenly understood they were going to live. The flight attendants were sobbing with relief. Emergency crews swarmed the aircraft, medical personnel boarding immediately to treat the sick pilots. Maya unbuckled and stood, her legs slightly shaky now that it was over. Morrison stood too, and before she could react, he wrapped her in a brief, hard hug. You saved everyone on this bird, Chief. Everyone. Maya accepted the gratitude silently, then moved to check on the pilots. Both were being taken off on stretchers, severe food poisoning but expected to recover. As Maya stepped out of the cockpit, the passengers saw her fully for the first time. The silent woman from 21C, the one they had ignored or pitted for her withdrawn behavior, had just performed a miracle. The businessman from 21B stared at her in disbelief. You were so quiet. I never imagined. Maya shrugged. Didn't need to talk about it. Wasn't relevant until it was. The teenage girl from 21A approached hesitantly, tears streaming down her face. Thank you, she whispered. Thank you for saving us. Maya placed a gentle hand on the girl's shoulder. You're welcome. It's what I'm trained to do. Over the next hours, as investigators and officials descended on Shannon Airport, the full story came out. Maya Torres, 8-year veteran of the 160th Special Operations Aviation Regiment, one of only a handful of female Night Stalker pilots, had happened to be on the exact flight that needed her impossible set of skills. The odds were astronomical. Captain Morrison gave statement after statement praising her actions. I've worked with the best pilots in the world. This woman ranks among them. She took an aircraft she'd never flown with minimal assistance, and landed it safely in challenging conditions. If there's a Pilot of the Year award, she deserves it. The airline executives arrived, overwhelmed with gratitude and relief that a disaster had been averted. They wanted to give Maya anything she wanted: free flights for life, financial compensation, public recognition. She turned down almost all of it. I don't need recognition. I was just doing what needed to be done. But she couldn't avoid all attention. News of the miracle landing spread quickly. Silent passenger saves 150 lives, the headlines read. Military pilots' hidden skills prevent tragedy. Maya's face appeared on news broadcasts around the world, though she refused most interview requests. The teenage girl's father, who had been waiting terrified at London Heathrow for news, tracked Maya down before she left Shannon. He shook her hand with tears in his eyes. My daughter told me you were so quiet she thought you were sad. She never guessed you were the person who would save her life. How do I thank you for giving me my child back? Maya met his eyes honestly. Love her. Be there for her. That's all the thanks I need. As Maya finally prepared to continue her journey to London on another flight, Morrison caught up with her one last time. Chief Torres, my team is going to hear about this. They're going to want to meet you, buy you drinks, tell stories about the Night Stalker who saved 150 souls over the Atlantic. Maya smiled slightly. Tell them I was just doing my job. Same as they do. Same as you would. Morrison nodded, then added quietly, you know what impressed me most? Not just the flying, which was exceptional, but the moment you broke your silence. You didn't want attention. You were perfectly content being invisible. But when it mattered, when lives needed you, you stepped up without hesitation. That's what makes a real operator. Maya considered his words. I learned a long time ago that talking about what you can do is less important than actually doing it when it counts. I didn't need anyone on that flight to know I was a pilot until the moment they needed a pilot. Then it mattered. As she walked toward her new gate, Maya passed passengers from Flight 2847 who were being rebooked on other flights. Several recognized her and stopped to say thank you. Some hugged her. Some just nodded with profound respect. The businessman from 21B approached awkwardly. I'm sorry, I assumed you were just antisocial. I had no idea who was sitting next to me. Maya replied kindly, you had no reason to know. That's the point of being off duty. But when duty called, I answered. That's all that matters. She continued walking, blending back into the crowd of travelers, just another passenger in jeans and a gray jacket. But the 150 people from Flight 2847 would never forget her. They would tell their families and friends about the silent woman in seat 21C who turned out to be a warrior angel, about the Night Stalker pilot whose refusal to seek attention made her heroism even more powerful when it finally emerged. Maya Torres boarded her new flight to London several hours later. As she found her seat, the flight attendant smiled at her warmly. I heard what you did today. You're a hero. Maya shook her head gently. Just a pilot who happened to be in the right place. Now I'd really just like to get to London quietly. The attendant understood and left her alone. Maya settled into her window seat, watching the Irish countryside disappear below as they climbed into the evening sky. She thought about the day's events, about the moment she had to choose between staying silent and stepping forward, about the responsibility that came with her skills. She had been trained by the best, had flown with the bravest, had learned that true strength often meant staying quiet until the moment your voice was absolutely needed. Today had been that moment. She had spoken when it mattered, acted when lives depended on it, and in doing so had proven that the most powerful warriors are sometimes the ones nobody sees coming. As the plane leveled off at cruising altitude, Maya closed her eyes and allowed herself a small smile. Somewhere over the Atlantic, probably framed and hanging in Shannon Control Tower, was the radar track of Flight 2847's approach. The controllers would tell that story for years. The Night Stalker pilot who never landed a 737 until she had to save 150 lives. And she did it without a single mistake. That thought brought her peace. Not the recognition or the thanks or the news coverage. Just the knowledge that when everything was on the line, when people needed her most, she had been ready. That's what 8 years of special operations training had given her. Not just the skills to fly aircraft, but the character to use those skills when it mattered most. Maya Torres, the silent warrior, had spoken when it counted. And in that moment she had reminded everyone aboard that the quietest people sometimes carry the loudest courage, waiting for the exact right moment to let it roar.